Hello, I'm Logan Barber. I'm currently taking this history course to complete a bachelor's degree in business administration. One of my favorite activities is archery. I'm a bow tech at my family business, Top Gun Shooting Sports, and I also teach the youth archery classes there. Outside of work, I've competed in a few archery competitions. Once school ends, I plan on competing in more competitions with the hopes of attending archery shoots across the country. I decided to research the ancient Roman gladiators to obtain a further knowledge of them and their life of arena fighting. Gladiators were the world's infamous savage warriors. You have all been raised on the stories of these great arena fighters, sold into slavery and forced to kill for their survival. Gladiators have gained a reputation for being poor and mistreated for the pure amusement of the free world. The truth is that gladiatorial life was much more than being an enslaved barbarian. Gladiators were very much a source of entertainment for fans as they were their own culture within the Roman civilization. The idea of Roman gladiators was much different than what most understand them to be. The games originated from the Etruscans, who were predecessors to the Romans. The Etruscans called these gladiatorial games munera. Fights were originally private events that were held to commemorate a person's death. Over time, their popularity grew and fights were held for important occasions. It wasn't until later that the gladiatorial fights were held for public entertainment. Gladiatorial fighting became popular and large amounts of people began joining the ranks of the contestants, and then it started to develop its own culture. People from all walks of life became gladiators, although most often they were prisoners of war, criminals, slaves, former slaves, or outcasts of the free men. For a short period of time, even women could join. Before a potential candidate could become a gladiator, they had to take a vow which consisted of an oath of loyalty to the lanista, an accepting of whippings, and an accepting of punishments by brand iron and sword. Gladiators were then trained at schools that were located across Rome called ludi gladiatori. Gladiators would train for fights that could result in their loss of their lives. Despite this, gladiators trained to fight to appease the crowds, not to be skilled fighters. Life as a gladiator was not as luxurious as the common citizen. Novices, or new and aspiring gladiators, would live in windowless cells with other fighters on the dirt floor. Experienced and skilled gladiators would become accommodated with their own personal furnished rooms. All gladiators, despite their skills, were well fed and cared for so that they could train and compete in games. On top of better living conditions, skilled gladiators were also allowed to marry and have children. There were multiple classes of gladiators that had distinguishable armor and fighting techniques. The main classes seen in gladiatorial fights were Samnites, Thracians, Murmillos, and Rotarius. Samnites typically carried a sword and wore the most armor. They carried a large square shield called a scudum and wore armor on their right arm and left leg. The Thracians could be identified by the use of a sicca and parma, or a small round shield. Murmillos gained the nickname the Fishermen. This was due to the fish-shaped crest on their helmets. The Murmillo also carried a sword and scudum, but had padding on their arms instead of armor. Similarly, the Rotarius had padding instead of armor, but used a trident and weighted net. Some of the other notorious classes were the archers, boxers, and bestiari animal fighters. Gladiators would often vary which weapons they used in attempts to gain an advantage against their opponents. The most common weapon used was the gladius, which is where the name gladiator came from. According to Rupert Matthews, the gladiator's lack of armor was to allow the spectators to see as much blood and gore as possible. The actual gladiatorial fights are probably the most simplistic of the developing culture and way of life. Gladiator fights were public fights that resulted in death. These fights were held in nearly 200 arenas around Rome, such as the Colosseum. Gladiators typically fought against exotic animals, prisoners, religious martyrs, and other gladiators. Historians have discovered, through studying the tombstone of the gladiator Diodorus, that referees called summa rudes would officiate the fights. What made gladiator fights so popular was more the outcome of the fight than the fight itself. A gladiator fight had a limited list of outcomes. 1. The fighter refused to fight. This typically resulted in the fighter being cajoled. 2. The most ideal was for the fighter to win. If a gladiator won his fight, he would gain support from fans, build his record of success, receive palm branches, dishes of prize money, and possibly freedom if he was skilled enough. 3. The worst outcome possible was to lose. A fighter could lose two ways, dying in the fight or appealing for mercy. If the fighter appealed for mercy, his opponent would decide whether to kill him or not. If the emperor was present, he would decide the appealing fighter's fate. However, it was considered professional practice to kill the appealing fighter. When gladiators died, they often received funerals and headstones to commemorate their legacy. The most humiliating fate of a gladiator was not receiving a funeral. The tombstone of Diodorus also indicates that beloved gladiators had decorated and engraved tombstones, some with their death stories carved into it. The legacy and life of a gladiator did not end there in the arenas, though. Superstitions developed throughout the year that involved the gladiators both during the fights and after. The more morbid superstitions include fans believing spears that were used to mortally wound another fighter carried good luck, and that warm blood from a slaughtered gladiator had disease-curing abilities. Other superstitions existed to aid gladiators in the arena, such as fans wearing emblems for good luck to a certain fighter. Gladiators were thought to be savages that provided simple means of entertainment to the people of the ancient world. As more is discovered about gladiators and their games, their perceived place in the world changes. Gladiators lived intricate lives that ultimately resulted in a distinguished culture within Roman civilization. The increased understanding of the gladiatorial games has also brought to light the evolution of sports and entertainment into what is recognized in modern times. Gladiatorial fights provide some of the first examples of modern fan membership and community that develops within the players themselves. The fights have also shared characteristics with certain industries of entertainment such as WWE wrestling. These two share the idea of fighting to please the spectators instead of fighting to show skill. Gladiators lived intricate lives in their own culture, which has ultimately shaped modern sports and entertainment.